up on this week's show, the Spectrum outsells the Xbox.
A secret is found buried in Majora's Mask.
And we get the story of Argonaut software with founder Jez San.
And the Retro Hour podcast is brought to you every single Friday with our amazing mates at Bitmap Books. Now, if you enjoyed this week's guest, make sure you check out their incredible book, Super Nintendo, a Visual Compendium, celebrating Nintendo's 16-bit wonder. All the big games on the platform are in there, and lots that you might have forgotten about or maybe flew under the radar, weighing in at more than 536 pages and printed to their usual incredible standards. If you love the Super Nintendo, check it out and the rest of their retro gaming collection at bitmapbooks.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 462, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And a very warm welcome back to the podcast, our first proper show of 2025. Happy New Year, boys.
Happy New Year. It's great to be back, guys.
Yeah, it certainly feels a hell of a long time ago we last did one of these normal podcasts. It was about 6 weeks ago.
How to do it, you know.
And thank you very much for bearing with us over Christmas as well. Obviously, the Christmas quiz episode that I know everyone was really hyped for. You know, it's always one of our favourite episodes of the year. Managed just to squeeze it out on Christmas Eve. And last week we took a bit of an extended week off because, as regular people in our Discord will know, I wasn't too well over Christmas. Thought I came down with the man flu, turned into pneumonia. Which won't be on my list to Santa this year.
Dan? So, yeah. So, I'm glad you're better.
Yeah, I'm feeling a hell of a lot better now. So thank you for all the well wishes in our Discord, and thank you for your patience for bearing with us for a couple of weeks. But things are back to normal now, and just one other thing I want to mention to you guys. Little song for you.
Happy birthday, Mr. President. Happy birthday to you.
Because at the time we're recording this, the first episode of this podcast came out 9 years ago today.
Oh, wow.
Man, that's crazy to think. And I think, Joe, you were on the third one, so we can do a Joe celebration.
Just play
I'll
that
find another song in 2 weeks, yeah.
You know what always makes me laugh is how you guys were very confident that this would have fizzled out after about 3-4 episodes.
Yeah. And here we are, 9 years later. So not only Happy New Year, but happy birthday as well, guys. 9 years, been an absolute blast. And here's to an incredible year in 2025 as well. I know lots of things that we're hyped for. I mean, I didn't get much chance to game over Christmas, you know, spending a bit of time in hospital, then sleeping about 15 hours a day. Any gaming goodies for Christmas, Joe?
Yeah, I got the Dead Rising remaster, which I've been really, really enjoying. And then the Silent Hill 2 remake, which I haven't started yet. And then I got a new Karate Kid game as well, which I haven't played yet either. I've been playing the Dead Rising game, which is 19 years old this year, the original.
Wow.
So that's kind of retro, I think. You know, they're all kind of retro themed. Other than that, you know, some smellies and chocolate, etc. What about you guys?
I got a giant Pac-Man lamp.
You did?
Yes.
It makes Pac-Man noises, so that was cool.
Yeah, I got a Raspberry Pi 500.
Oh, yeah.
Which I'm yet to set up. And really, I just downloaded like a few things which I must admit I still haven't got around to playing yet. I mean, there's a few things I'm hyped for. I was watching a lot of YouTube as well, having spent quite a bit of time in bed over the last couple of weeks. Enjoyed Modern Vintage Gamers video that he did, GTA 3 on the Dreamcast, which I'm definitely going to give that a download because you guys seen that the port is now out there?
Just kind of before we go into the news stories, I thought this was really interesting because the way that they've done it is they've, changed the textures, but they've used the GTA code that we were talking about previously, which is like that kind of redone version of GTA where they've, I think it got taken down by Take-Two. And it's been used on many other systems. I had it on my Wii U, but it's an amazing feat seeing it go onto the Dreamcast.
Yeah, and so I watched that video. I watched his the first Amiga virus video. It was a really good watch. There's another guy watching YouTube called Retro Bytes. He did a great kind of, it's almost like an hour-long documentary about the Acorn Archimedes the last BBC Micro. So a lot of time watching YouTube and getting hyped for some of the new retro releases that are coming out this year as well. I saw there's a new Outrun AGA port coming to the Amiga. Carmageddon got ported to the Amiga as well over Christmas, I saw. And obviously we've got some, there's going to be a new version of Worms Director's Cut from Andy Davison coming out. I think next month, isn't it? That lands on the Amiga.
Very excited about that. That looks good. Yeah, it's a new update with new levels and, there's going to be a lot of tweaking on there as well. Can't wait.
Yeah. And speaking of Team 17 as well, obviously we're behind Worms. Very sad news to see that Martin Brown, the co-founder of Team 17, sadly passed away over the Christmas break at age just 57. Just seen so many outpourings of love and, people sharing stories about what a legend Martin was. And obviously we had him on the podcast in our early days, didn't we?
Yeah. And what a fantastic company. And it was just great to chat to Martin and sad to see him passing so young as well.
Yeah, you will be missed. And I see there is speaking of Team 17, a new version of their shooter, Project X, that's coming out in the next few months as well. That Alistair Brimble's done the music for, and apparently it's going to be a nice little tribute to Martin in there as well. So, lots coming up in 2025. And of course, we'll be here every single Friday to keep you up to date on what's going on and bringing you amazing guests, because we do that every week as well on the podcast. And I think it's fair to say we're hitting 2025 running with this week's guest.
Yeah, I absolutely couldn't believe this guest. Jez San is just absolutely amazing. He's a guest I've always wanted to have on the podcast. We had, we've talked to Dylan Cuthbert in the book that we did, and we interviewed him on there and talking about, those kind of English companies that went over and English developers that went over to Nintendo and worked with them. Was absolutely amazing. We love that. We love talking to Rare as well. We've talked to them a lot, and that kind of connection of the British developers. And Jez is like the leading force in this with Argonaut. He took over, worked with them with the technology for the SuperFX chip. And originally, he was a fan of the Sinclair QL. He was, he was making a lot of interesting games on like the TRS-80 was his kind of start. So he had that great history of development, but also all of his games really, really push stuff graphically. And it was an amazing programmer. And it's just great to kind of hear his story of how that connection happened of, Argonaut Software, then starting to work with Nintendo, and then later on as well, Croc, which is just another fantastic title. I absolutely love Croc, and there's a remaster of Croc as well, which is really cool to hear about as well.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. We did mention it on the podcast at the end of last year that Argonaut Software are back after 20 years away, and Jez is back at the helm of it as well. So we hear about some of the plans he's got going forward for the relaunch company. And like you said, just some really interesting stories of back in the day, including some more obscure things, like he worked on the Conix multi-system and also worked with Philips on the unreleased Philips CDI 2.
Yeah, the CDI 2, we talk about that. Him working closely with Miyamoto as well, which was really interesting, some good personal stories there. And it's just a huge range of kind of technically impressive stuff. He was talking about, interchanging discs between the Amiga and the ST as well, and developing that technology, which is a really interesting idea, but actually wasn't that commercially successful at the time and didn't make much commercial sense.
Yeah, because he had some multi-format games, didn't he, where he said basically the disc would work on either the Amiga or the ST. Yeah. But you hear more in the interview as to why that didn't really catch on. So more on that, the history of Argonaut Software and what's in the pipeline as well now that it's been relaunched, with our first guest of 2025, Jez San, on the way in around half an hour from now. But of course, that means we've got 30 minutes or so to bring you up to speed on what's been happening in the world of retro. Now, bearing in mind that we haven't done the news for like 5 weeks, there's been quite a lot to choose from this week. But I thought we'd start with something that I know a lot of people found under their Christmas tree, and that was the Retro Games Limited, the Spectrum, of which I did a YouTube video about the Spectrum at the end of last year. Great little remake of the classic rubber-keyed Specky with a bunch of built-in games and that beautiful carousel launcher. I'm sure everyone's familiar with how Retro Games Limited do their systems. But actually, it turns out, this was quite the headline, that the Spectrum outsold both the Xbox Series X and S and the PlayStation 5 Pro in Spain.
I was about to say, I'm glad you said in Spain there.
Yes.
So that we weren't clickbaiting, because the headlines are the ZX Spectrum has outsold the PS5 Pro and the Xbox Series X. And then when you read it or click onto them, it says in Spain.
Yes.
And as you've just mentioned, it is the Spectrum, the new version, the remake, if you will, the re-release. It doesn't surprise me, because I know the Xbox is really struggling to a point where some games, obviously I keep track of a lot of like the retro games that kind of get re-released and stuff. Some of them just aren't even getting released on Xbox anymore and just going straight in physical editions anyway, and just going straight to PS5 and Switch, which, you know, is a little bit disappointing. But the numbers are quite crazy, to be honest.
And I think back in the days, like, it was outsold the C64 in Spain as well.
What the Spectrum did?
Yeah.
Interesting,
So,
okay.
so the Spectrum, they were forced to have a localized version. There was like a law where you had to have, you know, Spanish text on, and also a Spanish compatibility. So there was a Spanish company, it was called Investronica, and they actually produced Spectrums in the country as well.
Oh, okay.
Interesting.
So it seems like there was that big kind of like legacy in Spain. I know there was a lot of Spanish Spectrum developers and games as well.
It is funny though, if you look down the list, so basically giving us a list of the the top 7 selling systems in Spain in November/early December by the looks of it. So you've got PlayStation 5, Nintendo Switch, and then at number 3, the Spectrum, and then Xbox Series X and PSVR 2, MetaQuest 3. Although I've got to admit, the numbers are actually, for a country the size of Spain, the numbers are not quite as big as I'd expect during the run-up to Christmas.
Well, the PS5 is 71,000 units.
Yeah.
With 2,300 of them being the PlayStation 5 Pro. Then the Switch, 29,000. Then it does take quite a drop. The Spectrum, 5,500, and then the Xbox, 3,500. So it's the Spectrum, you know, is doing 2,000 more. But yeah, I guess to touch on what you're saying about the PS5 and the Switch, you know, that's only 100,000 units sold in Spain in the run up to Christmas. But we've also got to bear in mind this generation is the Switch is 7 years old now, and the PS5 is 5 years old.
Yeah, there's going to be new Switch this year apparently, isn't there?
So is PS5 maybe even 6 years old? It might be 5 years old, I'm not sure. A lot of people already have these.
Yeah.
So, and then obviously the Spectrum is a niche market, you know.
And it's cheaper. You know, at the moment, you know, cost of living and everything, you know, maybe buy a £90 machine over, you know.
Just imagine all these 10-year-olds waking up on Christmas morning in Spain being like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, we couldn't afford you a PlayStation, so I got you a Spectrum. Oh.
There's a bit of history.
Cheers, Mum. So it is interesting to see. I think the big story there is really kind of how badly the Xbox is doing in that part of the world, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think, you know, the figures for PlayStation 5 and Switch, bearing in mind, like you said, it's been out a long time. But it is just interesting to see the charts and seeing the Spectrum, the number 3 biggest selling system at Christmas.
It's like a kind of unexpected thing to see, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's heartwarming, and it's interesting to see how these consoles are kind of coming out and re-entering people's imagination, like re-entering the homes as well and getting talked about again. As an Amiga guy, I loved it when the Amiga Mini came out. I thought that was fantastic, and it's great to see the Spectrum. I wonder what's next up their sleeve.
Well, that Amiga Maxi keeps getting talked about, doesn't it?
Yeah,
maybe that'll make an appearance at some point in the next few months. So we'll keep an eye on that. But yeah, very cool to see the Spectrum up there in the charts in Spain. Now, this is actually a really interesting demo of a game that never came out on the Mega Drive back in the day. And actually, I watched this film not long ago. But I was actually I think I was sending pictures to you guys and took my car in to get a service one day, had to wait around for it. You know, they're always like, we'll fit it in when you can. too far away to get a taxi, so I hung around this area where the car was getting repaired. Had a look around a few of the charity shops. Went in one of them where they were selling, they had a whole wall dedicated to VHS videotapes. And actually got a VCR off my uncle a while back because he wanted me to transfer his old wedding tape to a digital format. So I got to put it in the bin when you're done with that. But I'm like, I'll keep the video. You know what I'm like. Threw all my videotapes out about 10 years ago. Start buying them all back again now, obviously.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, so, but Batman Returns was actually one of the tapes that I bought from this charity shop for a £1. And watched it on my old CRT, on my VCR. I actually quite enjoyed that film.
With the penguin in it.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
And Catwoman.
Penguin and Catwoman.
Yeah.
And then the first one was the Joker with, I was going to say Nicolas Cage then. Oh, my days. He was
I enjoyed Batman Forever as well. I know people hate on Batman Forever. But,
oh, dear. Oh, God.
All right, Jim Carrey and that.
But we're not here to talk about the old 90s, 80s and 90s Batman films.
Which is the best Batman fight?
You know what?
Talking about the games.
Batman Returns is actually a Christmas film. Set on Christmas.
There you go.
There you go. Just, a little bit of a fact there. But this is kind of why we're talking about this story as well, because this story was released over Christmas time. And as you said, we've got a lot of stories to talk about. But Batman Returns had a fair few video games for it, in 1992. But one of the best, if not the best version of the game was the side-along beat-em-up, belt stroller, if you will, beat-em-up.
You love your brawlers.
I do love my brawlers. For the Super Nintendo, which was a Konami game, and it was absolutely fantastic. And I actually, I had this as a teenager when I first got into buying retro games again and stuff. Me and my pal Richard, we used to play this game, and we loved the soundtrack, the feel of it, the graphics. It was an absolutely fantastic game, but it was only on the Super Nintendo, didn't come out on the Mega Drive, and it was only single player, which is just a bizarre choice, I think, for, a Konami beat 'em up.
Those games are so much better couch co-op, aren't they?
Absolutely. But over the last couple of months, Time Extension have been covering a studio who have been making a port for the Mega Drive of Batman Returns, the Super Nintendo version, so the SNES version, but for the Mega Drive. And on Christmas Day, they have released it to the world, a demo of the first couple of levels, and they have said they're not going to continue with it. This is it, go enjoy it.
That is disappointing news, I think.
It is disappointing news, but I guess they don't want to get shut down, get into trouble, etc. Because they are a studio. They're called Pyro Studios, I think, or Pyron Studios. But if you guys have watched this video of this, one, which I'll get back to, it's absolutely fantastic, this port. I absolutely love it. But secondly, they have put a second player mode in there, 2-player mode. Disappointingly, it is just two versions of Batman. Obviously, there was
not even coloured differently, which I think was a bit.
No, it's just two Batman fighting along. No Robin, because there famously wasn't a Robin in Batman Returns.
Could have been Catwoman.
Yeah, but Catwoman's one of the bosses in the game, so yeah, so it would have been a bit weird. But yeah, two Batman in there. But graphically, it looks absolutely fantastic. If anything, I don't know if I think it looks a little bit better than the SNES version, maybe. The sound of it, very Mega Drive.
Do you want to hear a bit?
Yeah, go on then, if you've got it.
Yeah, and a few people have pointed this out, that there are some samples in this from some other games.
Oh yeah, it's great.
Yeah, so apparently there's some Metal Slug and Streets of Rage samples.
Yeah. I recognise Streets of Rage straight away. But yeah, 60 frames gameplay, 9 enemies on screen at the same time. I'm trying to think how many enemies you can get in Streets of Rage. I feel like it's quite a lot.
9 feels a lot though.
But 9 does feel a lot. But yeah, man, this looks absolutely fantastic. I want to get my hands on this demo. It just I say it all the time when these things look really good, but a real labour of love. There's even some cutscenes in there as well. It just,
I'm not sure how I feel about two Batmans on screen at the same time.
Yeah, it should have made him purple or something.
Yeah.
That would have.
That would have helped a little bit. Yeah, or just coloured him Robin colours for a laugh.
Yeah. I think it looks incredible. I mean, again, that 2-player mode should have been in the original anyway, I think, because those games are just so much more fun with a friend, especially when you can do friendly fire.
Yeah.
Always love that in those games. And yeah, I mean, I'm kind of hoping that I understand, you know, you don't want to go up against DC Comics, not a company that you want to end up in court with.
Yeah.
But it would be nice if maybe they just kind of, you know, they've released this demo that you can download on itch.io. You can put it on your EverDrive. But it would be nice if they shove the source code up there as well and just kind of put it out there. And if anyone wants to finish it, they can.
Yeah.
I think that would be cool. Because it does look too good not to finish, in my opinion.
Yeah, like you say, you don't want DC coming after you, especially with them kind of like they're redoing all the DC cinematic universe again and everything. So
I understand
when you're back. Yeah.
Yes, but it is out there if you want to give it a download on your EverDrive or via emulation. I'll link that in this week's show notes. Very cool. Now, you're a fan of Majora's Mask, probably one of the most atmospheric games on the N64.
For me, it's one of the most atmospheric games of all time. It is oozing with atmosphere and creepiness and dread and darkness.
What if I was to tell you, Joe, that there are some hidden secrets inside
I'm not
Majora's
surprised.
Mask?
I am not surprised at all that there are still secrets to be uncovered in Majora's Mask. And also, it doesn't surprise me that what the secret is in there, you know, in the code. But I do love this. So this was posted earlier this week that somebody's been snooping around in the code of Majora's Mask, which a lot of people do these days.
It got decompiled recently, so people are kind of going through the source code and looking for secrets.
Yeah. So they have found in all versions of Majora's Mask, so the Japanese, US version, European versions, lines of code for voice commands through the N64 microphone, which I actually forgot was a thing.
It's really weird, this like voice recognition unit. I'd never seen it before.
I've seen it.
Yeah, you plug it in for Hey You Pikachu, which is like a virtual pet Pikachu, and you shout at Pikachu.
That is correct. Yeah, bang on, spot on. So it's Hey You Pikachu, and then Doshin the Giant, I always call it Deshin the Giant, but it's Deshin the Go 2, which was, I believe, was only on the 64DD in Japan, which was also a game where you would give commands to a character and they'd do stuff for you. But as it turns out, not only are the lines of code there to say like, oh yeah, here's, you know, the voice commands and stuff, they actually work still in the Japanese version of Majora's Mask, as long as you're using a Japanese microphone.
And can speak Japanese.
Yes. You have to also do the commands in Japanese. And what they've figured out so far is just a few commands that like allow you to get some different different weapons out, different items out, and there's like a camera you can get in Majora's Mask and take a picture with. You can command it to get that out and take the photo as Link.
You have to reverse engineer the ROM a bit.
Right, okay.
Get the kind of, for it to run on the original hardware, get the commands to kind of come back in action.
I think it was, they were commented out apparently in the source code and he's re-enabled them again.
Right, got you.
And that's how he's got this working. But yeah, the commands are, so if you want to get a picture taken in it, on the picture box, you've got to say, hi, Chizu. And then you snap a picture, which is Japanese roughly for say cheese. You can also milk cows with it as well.
Yeah, well, you can milk cows anyway.
What was like milk cows in my N64?
So it makes sense. And then you can also get the Deku Scrubs, which are a race in the game to wake up because you get sleeping ones. But the reason
apparently I was reading a comment that said there's only one of them sleeps in the entire game.
Oh, is there? Oh, okay.
Which seems quite a lot of effort to implement voice control for just one character in the whole game.
I've not played it in a while, but yeah, it's interesting because my first thought when I was reading this, and then it is in the article, was the original Legend of Zelda for the NES and the Super Famicom. Obviously, did actually have voice commands in it, which were for the Super Famicom version because of the Famicom controllers had the not Super Famicom, just the original Famicom. Sorry, the original Famicom controllers did have speakers built into them, and it said in the instruction manual that you could shout at like certain enemies when you'd walk into a room.
Yeah,
so you'd shout into your controller, and it'd kill the enemies on screen. So maybe it was something they were trying to bring back. You know, a bit of a kind of like, oh, you know, look what we did 15 years ago on the Famicom. But I'm guessing at the last minute they turned it off. They disabled it so that it couldn't be done. But it's funny that these things are still being found from the huge Nintendo data leaks.
That's the thing. I mean, the fact they only implemented that in 2 games anyway, it obviously seems like a peripheral they just probably didn't think was worth the effort in the end.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I don't know about you guys, voice control in video games, never really anything that's kind of interested me. No. The only one I really kind of had fun with was on the Dreamcast, Seaman, because that is quite novel. Yeah. Which
I've been playing Rust recently, and they implemented it with when the dogs chase you. You can go rah, 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 back at them and they run away. So I've been having fun with that, shouting.
Imagine your neighbours, he's barking again. So, very cool. If you do happen to have a N64 microphone peripheral and the ability to load this onto a flash card, then could be a bit of fun for 2 minutes. So if you want to read more about that, I'll link that and the video in this week's show notes. Now, we have got some more stories on the way, including a rather cool-looking new game, which we found of Chaos Engine, and a really nice new version of the PlayStation that we'll talk about in a second. Before we do, a little reminder, of course, we did say that this podcast is at 9 years old this week, and obviously being our birthday month, that's actually when all our bills come out, hosting and everything, website costs, all of that kind of thing. So having Patreon is a massive help around this time of year, and we did put out a bonus after hours episode for everybody last week.
Yeah, so you could kind of get a vibe of what the after hours is like, and we got like 40 episodes of the after hours, or maybe even
46
more
it'll be.
46. My God, yeah.
So we're recording another one next. So, if you haven't heard the After Hours before, maybe you heard that little teaser last week, that one episode that we put out. We do this every month for our patrons, for our gold members and above. We do lots for the perks as well on the normal podcast. You get it ad-free. We do an extra 2 or 3 news stories every single episode. We've got a little secret area of Discord for our patrons where we're chatting away in all the time. But really, the main reason that you're doing it is to support the podcast and help us out with our running costs and make sure that we can continue bringing out the show every week throughout 2025. And actually, we're going to be doing our first Patrons Hangout of the year at the end of the month as well. We do this every month. Always a giggle. Basically a massive Zoom call. All patrons are welcome. And we did get a few new patrons over Christmas as well that we would like to induct into the most prestigious high score table in the world of retro gaming. And that, of course, is the Retro Hour Hall of Fame.
Hall of Fame.
And a massive welcome to Riza Ahmadi,
Daniel,
Tom Kolstad,
and Mike Ogrins, who all joined us on Patreon over the last few weeks. We hugely appreciate your support, and hopefully we'll see you on the Hangout this month. And if you'd like to join our wonderful patrons community, all the details to sign up and support the podcast are on the website, theretrohour.com. Now, FPGA technology is something that has been really interesting, particularly in retro over the last decade or so. So many interesting uses for it and so many incredible new systems that hit in the market all the time. Unlocking the power of a FPGA. What does that stand for, Ravi?
Field Programmable Gate Array. That's hard to say.
That's correct. Well, there's now a new take on it. This is called the R21.
Yeah, so this is Taki Undon, and he's the creator of the Mr. Pi. And the Mr. Pi, as we've seen, has been fabulously successful. It's kind of a cheaper version of the Mr., which originally came out. It's like £99. I think
it's an FPGA-based console that can basically run lots of systems firmware.
Lots of different cores and firmware, and it works quite well. But
I'm always hesitant to say emulate, but people will know what we mean if I say that.
And he's helped reduce the cost of it basically because they were quite hard to get. The D10 Nano boards, which were kind of originally used for the educational market, and they were kind of subsidized when they were created as well. So they went away. They were tough to get. There was a big shortage of them, especially during the chip crisis. So the Mr. Pi came out, and that's really solved that problem. And it's been massively successful. It's packaged nicely. It's well done. He's just released some designs for this new PlayStation 1 console, which is codenamed R21, ONE, that is. And it looks a bit like R-Zone. With the number 2 on it. It's a clone of the PlayStation 1 ONE. the round one that came a bit later.
The smaller one, yeah.
Yeah, the smaller one with the rounded edges. It looks really cool from what he's put out there. It's got 2 memory card slots and slots for the original controllers, as well as slots for USB, and it's got Bluetooth compatibility as well with controllers. I'm sure it's going to be a very accurate PlayStation emulator, and it's interesting that we've not really seen, well, I'm not saying emulator, a PlayStation.
You're in trouble now.
Yeah, recreator. There you go. But yeah, it's interesting that we've not seen a specific PS1 FPGA kind of come out. We saw the PS Mini, and that was out of the mini consoles, probably one of the least successful ones, actually.
Yeah, flopped on arrival, but actually pretty cool now because you can get them for like next to nothing.
Yeah.
Obviously,
and
people have hacked them and everything.
Yeah, you can change them, and he's announced a price as well, which is $225 underneath it, basically. So it's going to be less than that. And then the Founders Edition, so people that back it first are going to get a huge discount on that. So this sounds like it's going to have a decent price as well for what it is. And I've been trying to, run PS1 games on my PS2 under kind of free-up boot and all of that stuff. It's an absolute nightmare. It's really tough to get it going. I know some people have, but you have to convert it to pop files and VCDs and all of this, and it's just like...
Just playing them off a hard disk.
Yeah. And
I was about to say, Ravi, you do know.
You can just put the discs in. Yeah.
I just love a solution like this, and I'm sure this is going to have like hard disk support as well as the original discs. I think they'd have a little slot there for an SD card somewhere, I can imagine.
Well, it's got USB support on there. I mean, from what I've seen in the articles and the tweets, it doesn't look like it's going to have an optical drive on there. So you're going to have to basically download the games and store them on a USB, which again, you can get massive USB
I
sticks.
think it would be tough to get that top loading style these days as well, with the drive.
Yeah, and I mean, it adds expense and complexity to it, which is not really needed. I mean, you can get a massive USB stick, and I'm sure, or like you said, a USB drive even, and a few terabytes. I've bought a 10 terabyte USB drive for about 130 quid recently. So you can get one of those and basically shove every PlayStation game on there, load them from a menu. And the thing about it being FPGA is obviously they're aiming for, instead of traditional emulation, a much higher level of accuracy. Yeah. And, you shouldn't get things like latency and input lag and all that kind of thing. The pictures he's shared of it so far, they're all very zoomed in, aren't they? So it's just parts of the system. But yeah, I think in terms of the logo, it does look like the PS1, font.
But it's also got this thing called Tap2 as well, which is it's kind of like, it's really interesting actually. It's like NFC cards. So I think it's going to have an NFC chip on there, and you can load up the games onto the cards and then tap it on the top. A lot like you'd have Amiibos and you'd do it on like the Wii U or the Switch or something like that. So that will work, and I think that's going to be a way of loading games onto it as well, Tap2, which sounds pretty interesting and a cool little system as well that I've not really looked into, but it looks quite nice from what I've seen.
One thing I think that is nice about this is obviously it's going to have, it doesn't really mention it in the articles I've seen, but I assume it's going to have, HDMI output.
Oh, it's got
nicely upscale the games and, make it a nice, easy way to play them on modern displays.
Well, I'm sure it will have a lot of options that, the core can offer, because it's going to be, the Mr. Core, isn't it? And it's going to be put on there. It must be.
I'm not convinced on the FPGA scene of it all. I think it's cool, but you know me, I buy original hardware all the time. But I know a lot of this original hardware isn't going to last forever. I'm very on the fence with it all. It's cool to see, but I don't buy it. I guess is the bottom line. Like, I think it's cool, and I understand it, but you know me, I'm passionate for my collecting. So
I think also that there's a good point with FPGA that it's been quite complex before, and it's looked quite complex as a setup. If you look at something like the Mr. Pi, it looks like a crazy kind of machine all sandwiched together and stuff. With this, you're not going to see anything. It's going to be in a nice, presentable case. And
I think for me, I like the idea of it. And yeah, like you said, Joe, you know, the original hardware is not going to last forever. So I think it's important to have things like this to preserve the legacy going forward.
Yeah.
That said, they did sell 102 million original PlayStations. So I can't imagine the supply of them is going to dry up.
And you know,
anytime soon.
I've like found one for 20 quid the other day.
Yeah. That was my next point. They are dirt cheap. So I think the price they're asking, you know, $225 or south of $225, you've got to be really wanting an FPGA PlayStation 1 that can output to a modern display for that price.
If you look at the analog ones that they've done, like the Super NT and stuff, they're for the like high end, you know, collector that wants the best output. That's know, and I think adding also stuff like adding an SD card to the original PlayStation is quite a task and quite expensive. I think it has that PS. I think it's 1 or something. There's
the optical drive emulator.
Yeah, and I know that's got quite a high price tag. So I think it's a different kind of market from as regular PlayStation buyers. It's like the super elite PS1 fans.
I mean, I play my PlayStation original, on a 14-inch CRT. I've got a mod chip in there from like 1998 and just burn CDs for it still, which does me. But like you said, I think, you know, for the hardcore that want, you know, that incredible display output and, you know, something that can do cycle accurate simulation.
You need to be doing the swap trick, Dan. Come on.
It's nostalgic for me, yeah. So, if you want to read more about that, I'll link that in the show notes as well. Now, we're all fans of Chaos Engine here. And looking at this game, if you're a fan of classics like that, this looks like it's heavily inspired by it. This is a new game that, interestingly, is coming out on a couple of Sega platforms and also the Neo Geo. And an interesting theme to this, it's called Soviet Borgs.
Yeah, I mean, this looks really cool. So this was shown off at the Retro Barcelona event in Spain last month, and it's set in an alternative reality where Soviets turned the world into a nuclear wasteland in the 1980s. I've seen a few people say it's akin to cannon fodder, which I thought was quite strange because of, like you've just said, it gives Chaos Engine vibes, like straight away.
You know, it's interesting as well looking at it. It's a 3-player game,
right,
which Chaos Engine originally was going to be.
Oh, okay.
But then because they had like frame rate issues, they put it down to 2 players.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
I think graphically, how would you describe these graphics? They're kind of like, are they 3D?
Very muted.
They're like early PC, just after PD game budget title, but of a certain era, like just after CD-ROM came out.
They do look rendered though, they don't look like hand-drawn pixel.
They are pre-rendered graphics, I guess.
Donkey Kong Country style.
Little Big Planet as well.
Donkey Kong, Vector Man kind of
It's just like the roundedness of them. You know?
It kind of reminds me, I don't know if you guys ever played Loaded for the PS1 or Reloaded.
Yes, Loaded.
It reminds me of that a little bit, but that did have some polygons going on and stuff, and Loaded was a lot faster than this. It's more the speed of like the Chaos Engine.
It does seem quite bare, the landscapes do.
I think it's still quite early, and obviously with it coming to the Mega Drive as well as the Dreamcast and Neo Geo, I imagine, you know, they've got to think it's got to run on the Mega Drive as well as those consoles. So unless they're doing all different versions of it, I guess they've got to, I don't want to use the word dumb it down, but maybe slow it down a little bit, you know, for the Mega Drive.
Yeah, and this is only one level that we've seen. You know, they could have multiple different levels and spaces and scenarios and worlds, you know.
And it is a nuclear.
You know what it reminds me of though? It is meant to be kind of a barren world, but the graphical style, it does remind me of the original version of Chaos Engine, you know, before they did the kind of
I know what you mean,
the more colourful
with the walls and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, which I always prefer that version of Chaos Engine, not the
which was in
AGA
a swamp,
one.
You know.
Yeah, that kind of lots of dark greens and browns. And, you know, which I actually prefer that look of Chaos Engine to the more colourful later versions.
Yeah, so it's by Retro Summers. And they've said in a few interviews that they're probably going to go down the Kickstarter, you know, kind of road with this. So keep your eyes peeled for that one. I'm sure we will mention it when it does get launched, because it does look very cool.
I did say before 3-player game. By that I meant 3 characters.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not sure how many actual players are going to be able to play it. Because obviously in Chaos Engine you could do couch co-op on that, which it would be nice to see in this. Mm-hmm. If you could have maybe 2 physical players and like an AI control character too. Because I think some of my fondest memories of Chaos Engine were always on the couch with my brother playing it together. You know, again, it's a game that just works really well in co-op mode. So if they do go down the Kickstarter route, got a feeling it'd be nice to see a physical release of this if it does go down that avenue. So we'll keep an eye on that story, and of course everything else we talked about. If you want to check them out, I save you the job of Googling around every week. I put all the stories in the show notes on your podcast app, or you can head through to the website if you want to click through at theretrohour.com. All right then, patrons, keep it here. We have got a couple of extra news stories on the way for you in just a minute. And of course, we're going to be joined by this week's special guest, Jez San, and the story of Argonaut software coming up on the podcast in just a second. Now, before we do that, let's just take a moment to give a massive thank you to our incredible sponsor, back for 2025, big supporters of the show, and that is our wonderful friends at Shopify. We all know them by now. They're the ones with this sound. The wonderful sound of another sale. You hear that go off all the time in your office, don't you, Revy?
I don't have an office, but yeah.
Your home office.
My home office, yeah. I love Shopify. Really, really good system. A lot of people are going to be going out to video game shows and they're going to be selling a lot of things. And it's great to have like a point of sale system out there that works. You can stock all your inventory on there and have
nobody carries cash anymore.
Prices, so you can do that quick transaction and quick sale as well. But it's also got support for the major cards, and it's just a fantastic system. I've set these things up before, previously, and set up e-commerce for people and stuff.
WordPress with plugins
WordPress,
and all that.
And it's been an absolute nightmare trying to get it all updated and get it all running, as well as getting phone calls at 3 a.m. going, it's not working, and then having to update it. But, Shopify, they've got 24-hour support. So that's just absolutely fantastic to have. Means you're not going to miss out on a sale at all.
Yeah, and they take care of all the hard work for you. You don't have to worry about, coding or design or anything like that anymore. And we've been using it for, about a year, haven't we? We've been selling our books via Shopify, which you can buy on our website. It takes all the headache out of it as well, does everything for us.
And it's very easy to design the store as well. You can just build it, and you don't need many technical skills to get that going.
Yeah, so 100%. If you sell anything, maybe you're thinking 2025 is going to be the year that maybe you invest a bit more in your side hustle, or maybe you want to go all the way and become your own boss. A lot of people are doing that right now. Shopify is the commerce platform that's revolutionizing millions of businesses all around the world. And they even get you selling across your social media marketplaces, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, take care of your marketing for you too. And it's full of industry-leading tools ready to ignite your growth every step of the way. So if you want to get serious about selling in 2025, why don't you give Shopify a try for yourself? Like I said, it's revolutionized us selling our books, really has taken the headache out of it 100%. So we definitely encourage you to give it a try if you sell anything at all, online or in person. And actually, we've got you a great offer. You can try out Shopify for just £1 a month. So if you sell anything, that is a no-brainer. So if you want to sign up right now for a £1 a month trial period of Shopify, head to this link. They'll know that we sent you. Helps out the podcast. Shopify.co.uk/retrohour, all lowercase. I'll put it in the show notes as well, so you can click straight through. Shopify.co.uk/retrohour and get ready to take your business to the next level today and hear a lot more of this. All right, then. Well, thank you for checking out the news this week. We'll have more for you on next Friday's podcast. And next, our first guest of 2025, hitting the ground running with a huge guest on this week's show, getting the story of Argonaut software with Jez San, next on the Retro Hour podcast. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it's time to welcome on this week's very special guest. And this week, for our first guest of 2025, what an honour it is to get some stories about one of the most legendary British software houses who are actually back, reborn and making games again for 2025. So we'll hear all about the history and the rebirth of Argonaut software with this week's very special guest, Jez San. How's it going, Jez?
Hey, very good, thank you. How are you?
Really good, thank you. And really incredible to talk to you and hopefully get some memories of your incredible career as well, and also hear about the rebirth of Argonaut software, something we've been covering on the podcast for the last few months, and are very excited to see what's coming up. So we'll get into all that. But before we do, we always like to kind of wind it back to day one with our guests and find out where your journey all began. So, I mean, do you remember what initially gave you the bug for video games or computers? Like, what was your first ever memory of that?
Mm-hmm. Well, we have to go back very far because I'm old. I got my first computer in 1970, I'm going to say 79, which was a Radio Shack TRS-80 Model 2. And I learned to program that, and I started learning assembler pretty quickly, because BASIC didn't really cut it, and it was a very underpowered computer. So I didn't do any games back then, but I did learn assembler programming. And then when the BBC computer came out in 1981, that's when I started doing games.
It's an interesting choice, the TRS-80, especially in Britain. I was wondering how you came across it, and did you find any other users as well?
Oh, yeah. No, it was a very enthusiastic user group, and we used to meet at the local Tandy store every Saturday. And it was one of the first home computers. I think it was probably... I mean, mine was imported from America because my dad was in the import-export business, so that was very helpful and easy for him to do. I think it was the first home computer, but it was not like a modern home computer. It was, had a separate keyboard and a screen and no mouse, not in those days. Eventually someone figured out how to get a joystick working on it. And there were games for it, but I didn't start doing games on that computer until I got my BBC.
I heard you were really into MUDs back in the day. So,
that's right, yeah.
Yeah. What got your interest there? How did that begin?
So, in the old days, I was a hacker and used to hack into the forerunner of the internet, which was called Janet and ARPANET. And we used to play MUD, which was the multi-user dungeon, on the Essex University mainframe. And I was very addicted to it and was one of the first, possibly the first external wizard, in that I progressed through the levels until I got to wizard. All the other wizards at the time were internal in the university, but I got all my friends involved as well, and they all became wizards too. And then we used to chat inside the game like it was a chat room, as well as play the game.
We had Richard Bartle on the podcast, and he was, telling us about the history of MUDs, and it's absolutely fascinating, that kind of early, online experience.
It was very formative for me because despite being a text-only game, it did teach me a lot about what you need to have an engaging multiplayer experience. So even though it wasn't particularly real time, but it was still very formative for me, and it got me into games, I guess.
Were there any particular titles that you were really into on there?
The game I played to death was Mario World, which was, Mario number 4 on the SNES. And I may have been the first person in the world to finish it outside of Nintendo, I should add, because I got given a Super Famicom before it came out. And the only game I could play on it was Mario. And so I just played it and conferred with my friend in Nintendo, Tony Harmon, that between us, we figured out how to get past all the levels, and I got to the 96 levels. So I think I was the first person outside of Nintendo to actually finish that game. But I played it like morning, noon and night, played it to death, went to bed straight after playing it, woke up in the morning and played it. I mean, it was my life for a month.
Well, I was wondering, kind of going back as well, you were creating some like early tools as well, and you created a great kind of porting system called PDS.
That's right.
Yeah, that was with some of your friends as well.
My friend Fu and I, we did the first PDS, and then it got taken over, and PDS became a standard tool that all the developers were using for a while. But yeah, the one that we built was running on a BBC computer and allowed you to remote control a Commodore 64. And so we could use the BBC's tools and assembler that was built in, and then remote control the Commodore 64, so you could be developing on one computer while you're seeing the game on the other computer, and you could refine it and make changes and then see the results in seconds. So it was very useful.
I think that must have been quite a big process, having to learn the two architectures and get that working. You needed quite an intricate knowledge.
Back then, you learned assembler. You could only program in assembler. There were no useful high-level languages. Certainly for doing games, you needed to program in assembler. But the hardware was unique on each computer, and you just had to learn it, and it wasn't that difficult. And once you knew how the hardware worked, you could make a game for it. And, there wasn't any abstraction that there is today with libraries and APIs. It was all hitting the metal directly, and you could get the best performance out of the hardware by doing that.
Well, piracy was a really big problem, particularly back in the 80s and 90s. I mean, it was a bit of a cat and mouse game with the users and companies. I mean, did you enjoy creating copy protection, and how did you kind of keep one step ahead of the pirates?
I did both. I would pirate the games and hack them, and I would also come up with copy protection schemes. So I was kind of, poacher turned gamekeeper, but also turned poacher. Like, I was a kid, everyone was hacking games. I mean, when I say everyone, all of my contemporaries that were also into the development of those home computers. We were all hacking the games, and we were all coming up with innovative ways of overcoming copy protection. So I was very well placed to design copy protection because I knew many of the ways that you could hack a game.
You also ended up selling that to Acorn Soft as well.
That's right, yeah.
Was this the start of your kind of business in the video game industry? And at that kind of age, where did this business mind and kind of drive come from?
I think I inherited my commercial and business mind from my dad, who was a businessman. As I mentioned, he was in import-export. And so I kind of had his genetics and his experience to give me, sensible commercial goals. But I had the geekiness and the interest in the hardware and how it worked, and in optimizing software and spending a lot of time eking out the best possible performance. And I think Acorn Soft wasn't my first paid gig, but it was a very critical one. Ironically, my first one was actually as a hacker, and I was hacking into one of the first email systems, which was called Telecom Gold, and it was owned by British Telecom. And then I also wrote them a security report, which they paid me for. Not very much, but I was only a kid. That was, telling them some of the security holes so they could fix them, which they did. And then with Acorn Soft, I designed a disk copy protection system, which not only was very difficult to copy, but it also bridged the gap. There were two different disk formats at the time, and you either had a 40-track disk drive or an 80-track disk drive. And the disks for the 40-track disk drive didn't work on the 80-track and vice versa. And with my disk format, they did. So it meant that the retailers only needed to stock one version of the game. So it was, very commercially useful. And I repeated that trick again later, as we'll no doubt talk about.
And you also sold PDS to David Braddon as well, with them wanting to port Elite.
That's right. So that was actually a door-opening deal, because I was trying to pitch my game to Rainbird and Firebird at the time, and they wanted Braybird and Bell to use my PDS system to help them develop the Commodore 64 Elite. So we sold them the PDS, and I also sold them a little bit of code to get them started, to, show them the ropes on the Commodore 64 at the time. And that was in exchange for me getting my first game deal, which was StarGlider.
Well, Defender inspired Skyline Attack.
Sorry, you're right. That came first.
Yes.
That was in 82. Yeah, that was probably my first finished commercial game, which I did with some friends. Also, Foo, a little bit Andrew Glacier as well. And yeah, there's a whole bunch of early stories related to that one too. But I was some snotty nose, teenager. But yeah, that was my first commercial game, and I bought my first car with the proceeds from that game. So it was very memorable for me.
I heard that game actually had a snake game on the loading screen as well.
Yeah, actually that was Foo's doing. But yes, it was the first game that had another game while you loaded it, because loading games took a long time, even with the turbo loader. So while you waited the several minutes for the game to load, you could play Snake. And it was a pretty good game of Snake as well. And actually another of my friends' claim to fame was he did the infamous Snake game on the Sinclair Spectrum, which was called Slippery Sid. And that was done by my friend Bod.
Well, speaking of Sinclair products as well, you were one of the first people awarded the Sinclair QL, which is not a machine many people talk about with much affection these days. But I mean, why did you choose to get a QL? And also, kind of what memories have you got about that system? Because you worked on quantum theory on the QL as well.
That's right, yeah. If I want to brag, I can say I wrote a book called Quantum Theory, but then when you delve deeper, it's nothing to do with quantum mechanics. It was to do with the QL computer, which stood for Quantum Leap. And yes, it was a book some friends and I wrote, and it was a new computer, and it was the first almost 32-bit computer. Technically, it was a 8-bit computer with 32-bit some things, 32-bit arithmetic or something. It wasn't a true 32-bit computer, but it was a first, and so we got early QLs and we wrote the book. And several of us wrote the book together, and we roped in a few expert friends to help us with certain specialist chapters, like Rupert did the sound chapter, and can't remember what Andrew Glaser did, but maybe he did, or maybe he didn't do anything. But yes, that was another good time in our life, where we wrote most of the book in the Pizza Hut,
right,
in Edgware, on our little Model 100 portable computers.
Because I do remember that advert on TV as well of Sir Clive leaping over the Apple Macintosh and the IBM PC, and the QL was supposed to be his more kind of serious machine aimed at business, wasn't it? I mean, what did you think of the QL then, and did you have high hopes for it when you first got it?
I did have very high hopes for it, and obviously it let me down significantly. Yeah, the whole thing is typical Sinclair. It was done super, super, super cheap, and they cheaped out on everything they could. The tape drives, and even the very CPU itself was the cheapo version. So it was good compared to a Spectrum, but it wasn't good compared to what came next.
Well, you mentioned earlier, Elite and kind of porting that also with PDS led you to, StarGlider, but there was also a Star Wars coin-op that you kind of wanted to do.
That's right. So when I started StarGlider, it wasn't an original game. It was trying to replicate my favorite coin-op game, which was the Star Wars coin-op. And I love that game. And I love the 3D aspect of it and the first-person aspect of it. And so I wanted to replicate that. And so StarGlider in its early, probably first year or more, was actually Star Wars. And I was calling up the lawyer in the US and trying to convince them to license me Star Wars so I could actually do it officially. And we got a little bit far in the conversation, but then it was no. And they didn't find out at the time that I was only, some teenager. And I managed to use my dad as my front man. So Argonaut Software was originally my dad as a director and me as just a worker in the company, even though it was 100% me, but I was using my dad as a smokescreen. And then over time, as I got older and got a bit of a better reputation, then I took over and ended up being, the front man for it. So the first StarGlider I wrote mostly on my own, and I roped in a couple of friends to help me do some specific things like keyboard and mouse and, certain aspects of it. But I did most of the code myself and roped in my friend Danny to do the art, and Rainbird supplied parts of it. But yeah, most of it this was when Argonaut was really just me and then a few subcontractors like my friend Rick. But for StarGlider 2, the income that StarGlider made gave me enough money to actually hire a team. And so StarGlider 2 was Argonaut actually as a built-out team, multiple people working on the same game. And so that was kind of the first bigger project that we did.
And a lot of people said to me, we've had previous interviews where people have talked about StarGlider being one of their favourite games, and how, the digitised audio and samples when that kind of came out, that, jaw hit the floor.
It was actually pretty difficult to do. The Atari the Atari ST couldn't actually play samples natively. The Amiga could, but in order to get the Atari to do it, I had to open up my ST with a voltmeter in my hand, measuring the output pins of the audio chip and trying different volume levels of the 3 different sound channels until I could work out what voltage, and then I would plot it on a graph what levels for each channel I needed to do to get this voltage and that voltage. And once I had the full map of every possible voltage I needed, then I was able to write the code to generate sound samples. And then, not only was playing them hard, but back then there weren't that many ways to actually digitize sound samples. Luckily, Rainbird had allowed me to rent an early synthesizer that had sound sampling. I'm trying to remember which one it was. I think it was a Juno something. I'm not into musical instruments, so I don't know which one it was. And Dave Lowe did the music and the ident for it, and we sampled it on this synthesizer. Got it into, playing it on the Amiga was easy because it's good at sound samples, but on the Atari, it was very cool that it could play that theme song when you booted up the game.
And this was also years before trackers as well, so it was massively impressive.
It was very cool, but then I like doing things that people don't think are possible. So that's one of the things that challenges me is, no one thought you could do sound samples on the Atari ST, so I had to do it.
I'm interested to hear a bit more about the relationship that you had with Rainbird. Obviously, they were a subsidiary almost, you could say, of Firebird, which were, run by British Telecom, if I recall correctly, back then.
That's right.
So how did your relationship start with them, and what was it like working with them?
Back then, a few people in the games industry, including me, had an agent. I was actually the first client for Jackie Lyons, who was originally a literary agent and then became a game agent. And she was very business-minded and very copyright-focused. And she would open doors with various publishers and also negotiate very good deals that protected the rights of the authors. Trying to make it more like the literary world, where the book authors get promoted on the front of the book and they get a decent royalty for every copy sold. So in my case with StarGlider, I got a decent amount per copy sold, and I got my name on the box, or Argonaut did anyway. It's something that Electronic Arts originally started to do back in the early days of EA. They promoted the artists on the box and promoted the artists in the adverts. They stopped doing that when they got big enough. And it's actually one of the really bad things that's happened to the computer gaming industry is that the talent, the people that actually create the games, rarely get credited anymore.
I think that's amazing that you got royalties as well, because we've had so many guests that have come on and they were just, given a small kind of check or a load of cash, and then that was it. And I think that's good, because you had
you always balance up the advances that you get paid to help you make the game versus the royalties. And if the game sells well enough, then you break into royalties when your advances are recouped. And in the case of my deal that Jackie Lyons negotiated for me, I was getting 10% of the retail price, and I think it was a £20 game. So I was getting nearly £2 a copy, which was fantastic. And especially because I was just a kid on my own at home, living in my bedroom, my parents' house. So all that money that came in for StarGlider was what allowed me to build the team for StarGlider 2 and to actually set up Argonaut and make it into a proper company.
Well, let's talk about StarGlider 2, because technically that was a huge step up over the first game. And how did you learn about the kind of 3D with polygons? And obviously that was quite revolutionary for the time. Did it take much to get your head around all that? And technically, how difficult was it to make it all possible?
3D technology in all of those early computers was difficult. and not only doing the 3D math, but also doing the rendering, whether it was the vectors of StarGlider or it was the solid polygons of StarGlider 2. It is difficult, but you just have to make it work and make it run as fast as possible, and then on the next game optimize it even more and make it even faster. And there's only so much time that you have to create each game, so you can optimize it as much as you can, but eventually you run out of time and you've got to ship the game. So the next game will be even better, and the one after that even better, and so on.
Was it always your aim to kind of be 3D first with Argonaut?
It was something that I always loved doing, and it was a niche for Argonaut in that we were good at 3D games and we kind of made it our thing. I mean, other people were doing them too, although maybe not that many people doing it as early as us. But it was something that we were good at, and I loved pushing technology, and I loved getting the team to be innovative, and they were very innovative and very smart people, and we did some cool tech.
Yeah, talking of kind of innovative things, I think on StarGlider 2 there was going to be this like interchangeable disc system where you had an Amiga disc that would also be an ST. That's
right. So I think I pioneered that on StarGlider 1. Yet again, like I did with the Acornsoft disc format on StarGlider, the same disc booted on the Amiga and the Atari, and yet they were completely different disc formats and completely different computers. But I managed to program the game in a way that it ran on both, and then come up with a disc format which would boot on both. So it was very innovative. And at the time, the idea was that retailers would only have to stock one copy of that would work on both the Amiga and the Atari computers. And so they'd only need one SKU, stock keeping unit. That actually backfired in the end, because although it was a genius thing to do, they bought less copies because, at retail, they would like stack the shelves with loads of them. And if they had a shelf for Amigas and a shelf for Ataris, they'd buy two sets of lots of copies to display. And if the same box ran on both, they only needed to order half the number of copies. So it backfired on, and we learned. And then for StarGlider 2, even though the disc was designed to boot on both the Amiga and the Atari computers, they put a sticker on the box that said it was the Amiga version or the Atari version, so that they could sell two sets of copies to the retailers. And from then on, we stopped doing that dual format thing because obviously the market didn't appreciate it.
That's why we didn't see more of that then back in the day. I did wonder.
Absolutely. There's no commercial benefit to the publisher or the retailer. Well, there is to the retailer, but the publisher just wants to shift as many copies as possible into retail in the hope that retail sells them. And yeah, if the retailer doesn't need to order as many copies, you don't necessarily sell as many copies. So yeah, it was innovative, but it wasn't necessarily commercially useful.
I think maybe ST Format magazine did one as like a little novelty, in that kind of format.
I remember Public Domain magazine doing that. It was a tri-format floppy disk they had that I always thought was magical. Yeah, it worked on the PC as well. I never understood how that worked.
Well, I mean, ironically, the more different the computers are, the easier it is to make a dual format or a triple format disk, because then you're not going to run into the problem of the wrong computer running the wrong code. So, yeah, it's entirely possible to make a disk run on everything with effort, but it's not necessarily commercially viable to do that.
Well, you're doing all this, the sound sampling and advanced 3D graphics on the Amiga and the ST, and then kind of going a bit more, you could say, backwards, but obviously it was a handheld system, so everyone loved it, and obviously when we got our hands on Tetris, complete game changer. I mean, do you remember the first time that you saw the Nintendo Game Boy, and what captivated you about that system?
Funnily enough, with the Game Boy, we tried to imagine what it was, and we wrote a game emulator for it so that we could start developing Game Boy games even before we got our hands on a Game Boy. And we made some rough guesses that it was a Z80 microprocessor, which it turned out to not be, but it was pretty close. It was actually worse than a Z80 processor. Yeah, we did an emulation. That was Dylan's first job at Argonaut, was to do that emulator.
That was with X, wasn't it? And I remember reading it was an Amiga 3000 that you were developing that title on as well.
It was entirely possible. I actually can't remember what computer it was, but yeah, it probably was an Amiga 3000. But yeah, so we emulated the Game Boy and started building. I'm not sure X was the first game because we actually did start some other games first. We did a game for Mindscape called like Faceball or something that was 3D. And then Nintendo got wind of it. I can tell you the Nintendo story. We did two special things on the Game Boy that were impressive. One was we got 3D working on it, which of course was very, very difficult because it's a character mapped display and in theory you shouldn't be able to do any 3D on it, but we did. And the other thing we did was overcome their protection system, where if you remember on the Game Boy, when you switch it on, it drops down the graphics of the words Nintendo.
Yeah.
And then it starts the game. Well, it turns out they had a protection system in there that dropped down Nintendo, and if Nintendo wasn't present, it wouldn't run the game. So that way, they could stop people from selling unofficial or unauthorized versions of their games because they would have to drop down Nintendo to make their game run, and then Nintendo could sue them for trademark infringement for using Nintendo's name. So with just one capacitor and one resistor, which cost 1 cent of parts, we were able to make it drop down the word Argonaut and then still run the game. And the way that worked, which was ingenious and simple, was that it was this one capacitor and resistor on the top address line of the ROM. The word Argonaut is read and it drops down. And then the capacitor resistor charges up and ends up changing the address to be in a different bank. And then it reads it again and it reads Nintendo and then starts the game. So it was basically a flaw in their protection system, but it meant to the person that switches on the Game Boy with our game in it, it drops down Argonaut and the game starts, which, you know, Nintendo was like absolutely had designed it to not do that. So I took this Game Boy with a 3D demo and this special cartridge that dropped down Argonaut, and I walked up to the highest up person I could find at Nintendo to show them, and it was Don James at the CES show at the Nintendo stand. And I showed him not only the Argonaut dropping down and the game starting, but also 3D technology running on the Game Boy. He was blown away, and he was dragging me in to see all the other important people inside Nintendo. And I get back to London. This was in Las Vegas, obviously. I get back to London and I get a call from Nintendo saying, be on a plane tomorrow to Kyoto. We're going to meet the president of Nintendo. It was all very exciting times.
Did they mind you doing the intro screen, or did they...
They were blown away because, I mean, it demonstrates how, you know, kind of we're good problem solvers, and we managed to defeat their protection, which we did tell them how it worked, and they fixed it on a future version of the Game Boy. But obviously there were tens of millions of Game Boys out there that were not fixed. But no one actually took advantage of that hack in the wild. But it was a cool calling card for Nintendo, so they could see not only could we defeat their protection, but we could also do 3D. And also we did all that without any documentation from Nintendo because we were doing it on our emulator. So they were also blown away that a developer could make such a sophisticated game on the Game Boy without their tools.
Well, you mentioned Dylan Cuthbert in there as well, obviously. I mean, kind of going back a few steps, when did you first meet Dylan?
Argonaut was always very good at hiring talented people, and Dylan was, you know, a very young, I think he's joined us at 16, as did Giles, as did, you know, many of the other early Argonauts. I mean, we were very good at recognizing talent and getting them to work as a team at Argonaut. And so I didn't meet him outside of Argonaut, but he was one of the hires that we had. I think he applied to a job ad. We used to advertise in the back of Edge magazine and other magazines for developers, and obviously we turned down most of them, but the ones that we were impressed with, we hired.
Well, one system I remember being really hyped for when I read about it in magazines back in the late 80s, and there's even a TV advert that I've seen on YouTube in years since, was the legendary Conix multi-system.
Oh, yeah.
So what memories have you got of that?
I've got an awfully embarrassing memory of the Conix multi-system, but there are probably many. So when I was first shown it, it was probably at their factory, or maybe it was at a showroom or something. I remember I was with Jackie Lyons, my agent, and Win, what was his name? Win Holloway or something, the boss of Conix. I know his first name was Win, I can't remember his last name. Anyway, he showed me the prototype of the Conix and he gave it to me, put it in my hands, and I threw it up and down to feel the weight of it, and I said, yeah, it feels really nice. And unfortunately, I mean, I was sitting on the floor at the time, so I dropped it. It wasn't very far. It was centimeters, and it cracked in two. And I didn't realize that he'd given me a clay model of the game console and not the actual game console. And I just broke his model. I mean, I imagine he glued it back together again, and I imagine it was fine, but I just felt so awful. But then I wasn't told it wasn't the real thing.
It could have been $100,000 prototype. It
could have been. Yeah, absolutely.
So were you developing for it then? How far did you get with the Conix?
We did do an early game on the Conix, which I seem to recall was a motorbike racing game, kind of like Outrun, but with a motorbike. I don't know if it ever came out. I can't remember what happened in the Conix world. But yeah, the Conix system was a very overambitious company doing a not great console and overstretched. They just didn't have the budget to do what they needed to do to launch a games console. So I don't think it really ever got anywhere.
Well, when it got to the point of, Nintendo and Argonaut collaborating to kind of develop the SuperFX chipset, how did that all work out then? Were you traveling back and forth? Did you all go over? What was it like with the two different cultures as well, and translation?
How did it work out? Well, Nintendo flew me to see Mr. Yamauchi, the president of Nintendo. I was in his very, very hot room that felt like a sauna. I mean, I was sweltering. His daughter, I think her name was Coco or Koto, something like that, Coco, I think, who was married to Mr. Arakawa, who was the president of Nintendo America. So she was doing the translation. He only spoke Japanese, or as far as I know, he only spoke Japanese. I obviously didn't speak a word of Japanese. And through the translator, he asked, how much do you want? And this was to do 3 3D games for Nintendo, and most importantly, to teach them how to do 3D games. That was the deal. And I thought of the highest number I could possibly think of, which was $1 million, and doubled it and said, $2 million. And he said, yes, and then walks out the room. It was at that point I knew I probably could have asked for $10 million and he would have said yes, because money was no object for them. And I was just, like a young developer with a very small team, and $1 million was very good money, or $2 million. And then the crazy thing was, I get back to my hotel room that night, and my brother calls from London and says, Jez, we just received $2 million in our bank account. Like literally no contract, nothing in writing. They just sent the money.
Wow.
Because that's the way they do it, that they just trust you, and business is relationships, and contracts maybe weren't so needed. But anyway, it was a very good, impressive show of faith by them. And then we did do 3 games for them, and we taught them 3D. We held classes inside Nintendo. All of us in the Argonaut team were flying out there. Pete, Carl, me, Dylan. We were all giving them lessons in like classroom style with a translator, teaching them how to make 3D games. And then we did Star Fox for them, which was a collaboration. Our team doing the coding, their team doing the creative side. And we had the tech being built back in London. How the SuperFX chip came about was we had shown them StarGlider, which was StarGlider running on the NES. We had shown that to them, and it was very impressive considering it was a NES and it had no native 3D capability, and we had fast vector graphics running on it. We showed that working, and we didn't know that they had a new console coming out. And then they showed us the Super Famicom and said, we don't want to do it for that. We want to do it for this. And they showed us their new console, the Super Famicom. And so we had to start from scratch, and we did StarGlider on the Super Famicom and came back to them and showed it to them. And we said, this is as good as it's going to get, more or less, because it's a very feeble, whatever it was, I can't remember how many megahertz, but not, less than 2 megahertz CPU. Claimed to be a 16-bit CPU, but it was kind of a 8-bit CPU with some 16-bit functions on it. We showed them it running, and it was very cool for what their console is capable of. And they said, well, what if we want to do more? And I said, well, we would need to design a 3D chip to do that. And they said, well, how much would that cost? I said $1 million, which was like the most I could think of, the most I thought that they would fund for a speculative project, like give these guys that have never done any hardware before, like a project to design some 3D accelerator. And they asked, what will you be able to do? And I said, it'll be 10 times faster at 3D graphics. So then I picked up the phone and called some chip designers that I knew, Ben Cheese, who was an ex-Sinclair chip designer, and asked him, is this possible? Like, if we did this, this, and this, would it work? And he goes, yeah, we could do it. And then it was a collaboration between my team at Argonaut doing the 3D technology in software, and Ben Cheese and his colleague, Rob McCauley, that designed the hardware. And so between us, we designed the SuperFX chip. And when we were finished, although I had overpromised Nintendo that it would be 10 times faster than the SNES at doing 3D, for some things, it was 400 times faster. For 3D math, it was 400 times faster. For pixel rendering, it was like hundreds of times faster. I mean, we really over-delivered, and it was very impressive. And then we showed them StarGlider or StarGlider running on it, and it was very cool. And then we told them about some other functions that it could do, which they hadn't asked for, and we made it do anyway, which was sprite rotation and scaling, which we didn't need for Star Fox. But then when Miyamoto saw it, he immediately designed Yoshi's Island because we had sprite rotation and scaling. So my dream game, Mario, the follow-up to it, Yoshi's Island, was using a 3D chip, but in a novel way, just using it in 2D, but doing things that the Super Nintendo couldn't do.
That's amazing. I think, a couple of takeaways from that. If, next time a big company head asks you how much something's going to cost, always at a zero on the end, at least, I think is one of the lessons.
I learned that since then.
And also, the fact that you did over-deliver so much as well, and you obviously set that budget. How did you keep the chip costs down? Because obviously these are going to go into cartridges.
I was really just trying to name a figure that I thought they would actually go for, rather than how much it would cost, because I had no idea how much it would cost. And it may have cost more than that to make, but that was what I thought they would fund, and they did. I don't know if we actually broke even on the SuperFX chip, but on the games we did, because we got the $2 million advance, and then it broke into royalties on the first day because it sold millions of copies.
Well, I'd love to hear more about working with Miyamoto and how did Star Fox come alive then? What happened there?
Well, the way that Miyamoto designs games, or at least the way he used to design games, I don't know if he still does, is very try something, see what's fun, try something else, see what's fun. It's very trial and error. So they don't really design games in advance like we did, or that most companies do. They kind of build a playground and let you play around, and then design levels, and then see what's fun. And then once they've figured out what's fun, and what looks good, then they start building the real levels, and then that becomes the final game. So it means you kind of don't know when the game is done until it's done. And so they have a lot of R&D projects going on, building games. And that's kind of, Miyamoto is very seat of the pants. He plays the game every day. He makes wholesale massive changes every single day. So you just can't plan anything. You just have to go with what he's asking, and can you do this, this, and this? And then we have to go away and do that and come back, and then he goes, yeah, this is fun. He obviously didn't speak much English at first. I still didn't speak any Japanese, apart from, thank you and excuse me and whatever, and good morning, very basic Japanese. But we had a great relationship, and he's such a lovely guy, and, he would play his guitar, all the time, like while he's just thinking or talking. We would all go outside to smoke. Back in those days, everyone smoked, especially Japanese people. They all smoked. In fact, I seem to remember them smoking at their desk in some places. But
I was going to say, going outside doesn't seem likely in the 90s, yeah?
Yeah, no, I maybe I've mixed that up. Maybe we went outside to smoke, but I think that they did smoke at their desks. And they would even, all the usual Japanese stereotypes that you hear, when you're in a big meeting with lots of people, some of them will just fall asleep in the middle of the meeting and then wake up and carry on talking as if nothing had happened, or as if, it's just normal. Maybe they call that thinking or something. But yeah, it was. And then there was one hospitality incident I should mention.
Yeah.
I'm very fussy on my food, and I have very simple tastes. And to impress us, when we first got to Nintendo, they had made sandwiches for us, and they looked like just, buttered sandwiches. So I just eagerly ate it when I was very hungry, and then spat it out in front of them, which was extremely rude, because they put mustard on it instead of butter.
Oh, wow.
I can't stand mustard, but just having mustard in bread was just so alien to me. And that must have come across incredibly rude, to spit it out, the food that your hosts have just given you. I'm sure I've made many faux pas since then as well.
Yeah, mustard sandwich is not anything that'd be top of my menu list, I don't think. But.
No other filling, just mustard.
Yeah, wow. Well, I mean, obviously Star Fox was a huge success as well, and really showed off the power of the SuperFX chip. And then, so no, Star Fox 2 was in development as well, and actually got finished.
Star Fox 2 was completely finished and ready to go out. And then Nintendo obviously had decided to launch a new console. Maybe they'd run out of steam with the SNES, and so they were about to launch the Nintendo 64. So we know for a fact that they just took Star Fox 2, converted it line by line onto the Nintendo 64, and then did a few minor embellishments, and then that was Star Fox 64. It was based on Star Fox 2. So the game that we built never came out, and the game that they did release was mainly our game with some embellishments.
Well, people finally got to play it on the Super NES Classic Edition, didn't they? Yeah, a few years back.
Yeah, I absolutely. It eventually came out, I guess, however many years later. I think it was doing the piracy rounds even before that.
Yeah.
Was there kind of much pressure to compete with Sega as well at the time, with their 32X? And
there was a lot of pressure, yeah. So Nintendo wanted it patented to the hilt, so we worked with Nintendo's patent agents. We patented doing 3D on consoles. We did all that stuff because Nintendo was very worried that Sega's 32X was going to wipe the floor with them. And originally, when we designed the SuperFX chip, they were contemplating putting it actually in the console on the American version so that you wouldn't need it in the cartridge. And then to save money, they decided not to do that. But they were very worried about Sega eating their lunch at the time, and the SuperFX chip was their ticket to compete until the N64 came out.
Wasn't there also some VR experimentation with the SuperFX chip as well?
Yeah, so after we finished the SuperFX chip, Nintendo wanted to keep the band together, and so they asked us what do we want to do next, and we wanted to do VR next. So they funded us $1 million. I still hadn't learned to ask for more, to design a VR games console for them that was codenamed Supervisor. It was a visor that you wore. It had dual color LCD screens in front of your eyes. It had motion tracking, and it had a very cool 3D chip that we had designed. And little did we know, but Nintendo had invested in a startup in America that was designing a red display. I can't remember the name of the company, but it was obviously its claim to fame was it was completely red and it couldn't do color, but it was very high resolution. And Nintendo wanted to bet on that. And Mr. Yokoi in the R&D1 division was working on this other VR console that we didn't know about. There wasn't color, wasn't head tracked. It was, on a desk with a desk stand. But unfortunately, they canned our more ambitious VR console to go with the Virtual Boy, which we were very upset about. But there's nothing we could do about it because we were working for Nintendo and we did what they wanted and we designed it. But it was up to them if they actually put it into production, and they obviously made their own choice to do something different. The only slight consolation prize was the Virtual Boy was awful and didn't do well.
Yeah.
But what can you do?
Also, I heard there was some discussions with Philips as well about a CDI 2.
Yeah. So Gaston Bastien, the head of Philips CDI at the time, tracked us down, heard we were designing 3D chips, and hired us to do a 3D chip for them and design the CDI 2 machine, which we designed the chip for that. Unfortunately, he left before it was ready for production, and it never came out, which was the beginning of a repeated story that you'll hear me tell a few times now. So we did that for them. It was a very cool 3D chip, and CDI 2 would have been great, but it never happened. And then he went to work for Apple, and he joined the Apple Pie division, which was the division that had just done the Apple Newton, and he hired us to design a 3D games console. This is, I think it was before the PlayStation came out, and it was around about the time of the PlayStation. And we designed an amazing 3D chip for that would have been far superior to the PlayStation. And that was a games console codenamed Olive, because the previous system that they had done was codenamed Popeye. So they had Popeye and Olive. And that games console was a 3-way design with us doing the 3D chip, Toshiba doing the rest of the console, Toshiba making it and Apple doing the rest of the console. So that was the 3-way. One day they had an engineering meeting and they wanted us all to fly in for this meeting, but they chose the midpoint of the three companies, or mainly the midpoint of Toshiba and Apple, which was actually Hawaii. So they flew us all in for a meeting to Hawaii. Now, I'd never been to Hawaii before. It's pretty far. You have to fly for many hours to get there. You have to land in San Francisco and then fly for another 5 hours on top of your 10-hour flight. Wow. Just to get there. So we get there. We have a 2 or 3 hour meeting with Apple, Toshiba, and us, and then we fly home. I didn't get to see Hawaii at all. I barely set foot out of the hotel, which is you've gone to paradise and then you didn't get to see it.
Oh, nightmare.
But it was still fun working.
Yeah, I was wondering what the eventual
Apple.
fate for that was. I mean, it's in an alternate universe, we might have all been playing on our Apple Olives instead of PlayStations.
Yeah, I think it's happened to us a few times. It's happened several times since then as well. But we've been hired to design something for someone and then they choose not to release it because the actual cost of production and marketing is significantly more than the cost of design. So they can speculatively design stuff and they can put things into prototype stage and then still choose to write it off rather than spend hundreds of millions producing and marketing it.
Yeah.
And so that happened with Apple, that happened with Cirrus Logic, hired us to design a 3D accelerator, which would have been the first 3D accelerator for the PC. It would have been a graphics chip. Yet again, it got cancelled before it came out, and then NVIDIA shipped their one. NVIDIA's one was rubbish, the first one. NVIDIA since then has done amazing things, but their first chip was absolute junk. The NV1 chip, it didn't have perspective, it didn't have 3D math, it didn't do anything except render pixels. So it was pretty basic. Even our SuperFX chip on the SNES was superior to it.
Right.
But anyway, so yeah, NVIDIA did incredibly well with their very basic 3D chip. And so did 3DFX also have a 3D chip later that was very good. So we didn't get to do a 3D chip for the PC market, we probably could have had the first one, or the first decent one. And then after that, we got hired by Hasbro we came in at the last minute on the Hasbro project because Hasbro were working on a VR games console, and they were struggling with the 3D chip for that, and they just couldn't get enough performance for the price. They even couldn't get enough performance for their main CPU either. So they hired us to design them a triple microprocessor chip that had enough horsepower to do the 3D graphics, the audio, and the game on 3 different microprocessors, all on one chip. And we called it the Triarch, or Matriarch, actually. And we designed it. It was done in a very aggressive time schedule. We literally only had 3 months to design it. Although we had already designed the Arc microprocessor before then. So this was just a question of incorporating 3 arcs and finishing it. So it was possible to be done, but it was a very, very aggressive timescale. And then, yet again, Hasbro cancelled the project after they had spent hundreds of millions of dollars on creating this games console and all the games for it. They didn't spend that with us. They spent it with a wide, team from all over the world. But we did the chip for it. And it also didn't come out because, yet again, the hundreds of millions that they spent designing this games console and the games is nothing compared to how much it costs to produce it and market it against Nintendo and Sony. So
it's got cold feet. Yeah.
Never came out, unfortunately. After that, we got sick and tired of working for hire for other companies who would hire us to develop cool and then not release it. So after that, we decided that we're going to design a microprocessor that we own, that we will only license non-exclusively to other people, and that many people can license it, and that way it won't get cancelled. And that was the Arc microprocessor.
Argonaut RISC core.
Exactly, Argonaut RISC core. And it was at around the same time as the ARM microprocessor, although ARM did manage to get their first design win and get built into a phone. The Nokia phone used the ARM processor. And that was game over from a we're going to be in every phone point of view. But actually the Arc ended up being in billions of chips because it was a building block. And there was an Arc inside every Intel processor to do some housekeeping functions like Wi-Fi and things like that. There was an Arc inside every MPEG chip doing video decoding. I think to this day there's still an Arc inside every SanDisk memory card, or certainly there was. No pun intended. It wasn't called SanDisk because I'm Jez San.
I was going to ask.
Complete coincidence. But amusing, very amusing. But so the Arc did get used in billions of chips, but never as the main CPU, which was a shame, but it was very successful. And actually, we managed to spin out Arc from Argonaut, and both Argonaut and Arc went public separately in year 2000. Arc got bought eventually by multiple different companies and is now still in business, owned by a massive silicon company called Synopsys. And Arc is now in their designware catalogue of IP, but it still exists. It's still selling in the billions. And I mean, in the early days, we were getting a royalty for every one, but now I don't know if they get a royalty anymore. Certainly we don't. I don't know if Synopsys does.
Well, we've got to talk about, before we wrap up the 90s, I mean, obviously we have to chat about Croc, which, one of your most successful titles, or rather it sold 3 million copies for the PlayStation alone.
Yeah.
And I heard that started as a Yoshi game originally then. What was kind of the story with Croc?
So the story was we wanted to do something else with Nintendo, and we wanted to do the first 3D platform game. We knew Nintendo would never let us use the Mario character because it's, their pride and joy, and it's, only ever going to be in-house teams that use Mario. But we thought we'd try our hands at doing a Yoshi racing game, which was 3D and it looked like a 3D Mario. It had the same graphics that we had in Super Mario World, but in 3D, and it looked amazing. And we showed it to Nintendo. They were blown away. And then they gave us the shock decision that, sorry, we're not going to do it. And it was a blow. Later, Miyamoto bumped into me at a CES show and apologized for it and said, sorry, we didn't do the Yoshi game with you, but you can see we did do Mario 64 instead, and thanks for the idea. But anyway, so when we lost the chance to do the Yoshi 3D platform game, we had to rethink, and we still wanted to do a 3D platform game. We obviously couldn't use any of Nintendo's IP, so we just had to start from scratch. And we went through a lot of concepts to come up with eventually Croc, who is still green, so he still looks a little bit like Yoshi, but that was unintentional. But he was an original character. He had his own cute mannerisms, and we went through a number of different iterations of different characters before we landed on. And we got to do our 3D platform game. Unfortunately, we didn't get to do it first, because had we done it as the Yoshi 3D platform game for Nintendo, that would have been the first ever 3D platform game. But being a small studio in London that's not funded by Nintendo and doing it independently, it took us longer to do it. So maybe it was definitely the first 3D platform game on the PlayStation, and it was maybe the second or third in the world. But we got to do our 3D platform game, and it was very successful.
Well, obviously, Croc is back, which we'll talk about in just a moment. We're kind of wrapping up that first chapter of Argonaut, because I know in 2004 the company got put up for sale. What kind of happened there then, and how did you kind of leave then?
By 2000, Argonaut was public, and when you're a public company, the shareholders have a very high expectation. They want to see profits, they want to see growth, and so we were ramping up, and we were spending the money that we had raised when we went public to massively grow, and we ended up being 300 people in the Argonaut team in London. And we had done some other successful games. We had done Harry Potter for Electronic Arts, and it was incredibly successful. The Harry Potter game was also done with the same engine as Croc, and it was built with the same tools as Croc.
Right.
And the only reason they came to us was because we had the ability to rapidly create a game based on their IP. And we had done the same thing for Disney. We did an Aladdin game called Nazira's Revenge. I can't remember what other games. We did Alien Resurrection, which was partly with the Croc engine. So we did a few games with the Croc engine, but we had built this reputation with Electronic Arts of saving their arse. And basically they'd come to us with an IP that only we could do because of the timescales. And we did that with Harry Potter on the PlayStation and Harry Potter 2. And then they came to us with this new property that was coming out to be a movie, which was Catwoman. And they needed us to do this Catwoman game from scratch without even seeing the movie, because the movie wasn't out yet. We had to do it in 6 months, and we needed over 100 people just on this one game. And it was just like the biggest project we'd ever done by far. And we managed to do it, and we did a bloody good job. But the movie was terrible. And the day the movie came out, and we hadn't seen the movie, no one had. The day the movie came out, it flopped, and it was being pulled from the cinemas like within 2 days of release.
Wow.
And the game flopped. The weird thing was, even though the game was actually pretty good and looked gorgeous, EA blamed us for the failure of the game, even though, if it's a movie licensed game and the movie flops, what chance does the game have? So they blamed us and didn't give us any more work. And then we had to rapidly shrink from this massive company. And we had to shrink so fast before we went bust. And we just weren't able to do it. And we went bust. And it was very sudden and very sad. And it was basically because we grew so big that we were reliant on one or two publishers. And when they let us down, that was it. It was over.
Mm. Well, 20 years on, not many companies get a second lease of life in the way that you have now with Argonaut, which is back. You're back at Argonaut. How has the company come back then? And tell us a story of giving it a new lease of life and what the aims are this time around.
So I'll just backtrack a little bit. When Argonaut went bust, I personally did have some money, but not enough to save the company. But I did have enough to save a few pieces of the company. So I saved 2 divisions. One was the mobile phone games division called Morpheme, and one was a company in Cambridge called, at the time it was called Just Add Monsters, but it became Ninja Theory, doing a game called Heavenly Sword. So I managed to save those two pieces. And then I also bought the entire back catalogue of IP from the administrator. So I personally owned the rights to every Argonaut game. And then I sat on it. So that's 20 years later, well, more than 20 years later, almost 30 years later. I have always wanted to revisit some of Argonaut's games, some of the most popular, most loved games, Croc being one of the most successful and much loved. And I was waiting for the right moment. And then my friends Gary and Mike approached me and said, "It's time, let's do Croc." And through some immense collaboration with the original team, Gary tracked down all of the team members of the original Croc and asked them all if they had copies of the assets, copies of the source code, any artwork, any photos, any memorabilia. And Gary was tenacious and tracked down every team member, many of whom wanted to see this game come out again. And it was, a very big part of their life. And it was a long time ago and they wanted to see it come back. So we managed to resurrect all the assets we needed and more, because we've got a lot of memorabilia along, which became the Crocipedia, which is now built into the game.
Nice.
And we are bringing it back to a not only a new generation that have never seen it before, but also a generation that played it when they were kids and now want to play it again now that they're adults. So it runs on today's consoles, and it has embellishments that are optional, so you can make it look nicer than it originally did, but you can also make it look exactly like it originally did. So if you want the true retro feel, you can do.
That's
but you
a nice
can also
touch.
make it look, you can make it look high resolution and really smooth if you wish, if you like that aesthetic. So we've done a very good job of remastering Croc very faithfully, but also enhancing it sensitively, in an optional way, and it's soon to come out.
I bet that was really good fun to kind of be working on that again. And I was just wondering, are there any other titles that you may be revisiting at any point?
Well, firstly, I own the entire back catalogue of original IP that Argonaut made, so everything is a possibility. And now it's just a question of, will Croc do well? Will the market like it and buy it and give us enough revenue for it that we can afford to do Croc 2, or we could afford to do something else? There's demand for Buck Bumble, I see. There's demand for StarGlider. And there are many other games that Argonaut did, and everything is an opportunity, and we just need to figure out what the market wants and what is actually worth us doing, because there still is a lot of work. It's still very costly to do a high quality remaster. So we only need to do the ones that people want.
I'd love to hear that Buck Bumble theme tune again.
Hearing the theme tune, you can hear it on YouTube. It's been a single. Apparently, it's crazy that the theme song of a game has become some kind of club classic.
Yeah,
but yeah. All of these games from the Argonaut back catalogue are possible, as are original games too. So it's just a question of how well Croc does, and if it does well enough and there is a big enough audience out there for it, then we'll do some of the other games.
Well, from the buzz I've seen online about it, I think there definitely is, Jez. So I don't think you've anything to worry about there. So, but like you said, people want more Argonaut stuff. Go out there, support the new version of Croc, and it's incredible to see Argonaut back and releasing games again, and you at the helm, Jez. So it's been incredible to talk to you and hear some of your memories.
Thank you. No, it's been fun to go back down memory lane. It was a long time ago. I started Argonaut in 1982 and it died in 2004. So it's a long time ago. But yes, it's wonderful that we're able to revisit Croc and for him to still look as good today as he does, or as he did back then. And thank you so much for interviewing me, and sorry that some of my memories are a bit hazy, but it was a long time ago.